In this talk, I'm going to talk about some of my favorite custom reports. I'm going to assume that you took a look at the last lecture where I discussed how to make a custom report, because I'm not going to go through that again. I'm just going to indicate which items I put in those reports. So I'm going to talk about a dashboard, which is good for monitoring a run in progress. What I call a data table, which is good for comparing plateaus after a run or during a run. And then finally, I'm going to show how to add a useful metric, pages per second, to the default RPT report. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a dashboard. And as I said, it's good for monitoring a run that's in progress. It's 4 line graphs. The first one in the upper left-hand corner shows the number of users that are running. The second one, which is on the upper right, shows the average response time for each individual page. And these are line graphs. It's a line graph. The one in the lower left shows the CPU usage. And as I mentioned in the last talk, it's a resource counter, a resource set of counters. And so you have to select all items, and then once you've got your data, to create the report, you filter out the ones that you don't care about. And this one just shows CPU information. And finally, on the lower right, it shows you the total pages, the hit rate, how many pages per second. And it's all of these are for interval, which means they're getting points in time. They're getting the last sampled interval, and they're putting a point on a line graph. I should mention that I did not show you how to get these values, because I don't really remember. It was a while ago that I did it. So you'll have to poke around, and after you select the items that you care about, you want to have them look like these counters that are shown here. And when you get done, that line graph looks like this. And once again, in the upper left-hand corner, it shows you the number of users, which is sort of redundant because it's got those little boxes at the top, which also shows the number of users. And if you hover over those, it'll show you the number, or you can just look on the left-hand side and it's got the number. But it's nice to see it as a stepping graph. On the upper right is the page response time for each individual page. On the lower left, it shows the CPU utilization. And you can see that towards the end, there's a lot of variation there because it's just sampling points. And it's like every 5 or 10 seconds, depending on how you're set up. And so there can be a fair amount of variation every 10 seconds. And on the lower right is the page hit rate, the pages per second. And it shows it over time. So that's the dashboard, and that's fairly useful for monitoring a run in progress. The next custom report that I like is what I call a data table. And that's good for comparing plateaus or stages during or after the run. I've got 4 tables. The first one in the upper left-hand corner, I've got the number of users for the run, the aggregated hit rate for the run, and for run means for the plateau or for the stage. So these are not getting points in time, but this is getting for the entire plateau. And then third metric in the upper left-hand corner is page response time, average for all pages. So instead of giving you individual pages, it gives you the overall response time for all the pages. In the upper right is the performance counters for attempts, page attempts. So it's going to say how many times we attempted to fetch a particular page, and the response time for the particular page. So that will be for each individual page. Once again, in the lower left, there's CPU information. But this time, for this table, it's going to be average for a run, which means it's going to be the average for the entire stage, as opposed to just a point in time. And this is good. This is going to be generating a bunch of tables, not line graphs. And finally, in the lower right, you've got throughput as far as bytes per second, and one of those I think is a Windows number, and the other is a Unix number. And these graphs look like this after you get done comparing plateaus. In this case, I compared 4 plateaus with 65, 75, 85, or 95 users. And in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the page hit rate per second, which is typically, this is the number that we look for, what's the overall throughput for all pages. And the same thing is true for average response time for all pages. And I'm not showing the data here in these reports because that might be confidential information I don't want to share with you. Or I'll get fired if I share it with you. So I'm just indicating that there normally be data in those fields. And on the upper right-hand corner, you see the number of attempts for those pages, how many times we fetch those pages, and then in the right-hand side there'd be the response time for the individual pages at the different stages. And in the lower left is a CPU table, and that would be CPU information for, well, in this case it's a Unix box, but if it was Windows, there'd be a Windows metric there as well. And the lower right is the bytes received or sent. Finally, I'm going to show you how to modify RPT's default report to show pages per second on the summary tab. In general, all those information that I put in my customer reports, you can get that out of the default reports that RPT provides. There's a bunch of them. I encourage you to look through them. But for a quick place to look at the stuff that I care about, I created some custom reports. Okay, so let me show you how to modify RPT's default report. You click on the Manage Reports button, and it's an HTTP report. It's called a performance report, so then you edit it. And I wanted to modify the summary tab, so I say Edit Summary tab. It's a tab with 4 graphics. I'm going to modify the second one. That's the first one. So I would do Next to get to the second one. And this is the second one. And so I want to add a counter to this report, so I'm going to add a page performance counter. And it's under Hits. And it's page hit rate per second per run. So that will show you the page hit rate per second for that plateau while you're in a plateau. And that's the important number that we typically care about. And you say Finish. Finish to get out of there and close. And then when I display the report, it's a default report. Go to the Summary tab. There it is, page hit rate per second. And that's for the entire run, because I did not compare plateaus here. So since I didn't compare plateaus, it just shows it for the entire run. But if I had picked a particular plateau, it would give me a comparison report for that particular plateau. Or for that matter, while you're running, and you're in a plateau, it shows you the value for that current plateau. Now, when you're ramping or between plateaus, it shows you the average for the entire run. But that's still useful because when you're in the plateau, you can see that average response time per second for that plateau. So there you have it. Showed you a dashboard that's good for monitoring and running progress. A data table that is good for comparing plateaus. And I also showed you how to add pages per second to the default RPT report. Now, in-house, I should mention that these dashboards and data table, I have additional tabs on there that have information, additional information, but you can add whatever you need on additional tabs.